So by way of introduction, I'm Vanessa Ochs. I'm a professor of religious studies and Jewish studies at University of Virginia, and taught in the Bronfman Summer Youth Fellowship about 6 years ago, maybe longer than that, 7 years ago.
2012, I think it was, right?
So long, 8 years ago,
Yeah.
long time ago. And I just published a book called The Passover Hagaddah, a biography, which was published by Princeton University Press in their series of the lives of great religious texts. And so my book is a romp through the history of the Haggadah from the time it was a twinkle in the eye of the Jewish people. It took a long time until it became more than a twinkle. And as a student of new ritual and contemporary ritual in particular, I emphasize the contemporary Hagaddah in my book, and as a very beautiful example of what it means to experiment dramatically for this time. Of course, the radical example of a crafted Haggadah is so not radical any longer that it's Passover and people go on Haggadah.com and they make their Haggadah for this year. And my friend and colleague Shoshana Silverman tells me that there was a certain time when she was just used to the night before Passover every year, she would see all of her friends at Kinko's or Staples, and they would all be Xeroxing and collating the Haggadah for that year. Obviously, this year is very different. And when we talked about when Becky, you and I spoke about doing this seminar, informal seminar, several weeks back, I don't think we realized the extent to which the concept of a virtual Seder was going to be so loudly and widely broadcast, so much so that if you Google virtual Seder, not only do you have many opportunities to attend a virtual Seder, but you also have, at this point, absolutely dozens and dozens of explanations of how to have the best virtual Seder. And the one that truly surprised me was not the one from the Union of Reform Judaism or from Hazon or from Hayes or from any lovely Jewish organization. The one that truly shocked me was the one in Martha Stewart's magazine. So that even there. So now that it's pretty much a fait accompli that we have virtual Seders, it's no longer, it's like, can you imagine what if we have a virtual Seder? Not only are we having them, we've planned them. We know we've seen, many of us have seen so much of these helpful tips that we can recite the way that we can recite the 4 questions. We can already recite what is the proper protocol, that you mute, that you don't try and sing together, that people prepare, that you do it in your pajamas if necessary, that you don't aim to have the most vivid Seder of your lives. I mean, there's just even a set protocol, which is kind of funny. And so when I began to think about this idea several weeks ago, what would a Haggadah for a virtual Seder look like? I I thought that we would be originating something new. And if you look at many of the instructions, there are certain rules. You should ask, how is this year different than all other years? Well, my dear friends, you would have to be Rip Van Winkle to not have noticed that this year is different from all other years, and this Seder is different. But our psyches, our bodies are filled with this sense of difference. So there are two things I want to share with you tonight. And then I'd love to get to know you, get to have some conversation. The first is that Passover from the get-go is virtual. It's all about virtuality. If we use define virtual to mean using the imagination. The very first Seder, the very first Passover required a strong act of the imagination. Again, I'm not speaking about a historical event. I'm speaking about a literary a text that we have received, which is the story of the Jewish people. In this story, slaves, not yet freed, slaves are told to slaughter a lamb, as we know, and to make a mark over their houses, which the angel of death is supposed to interpret in order to mean to save the baby inside. Well, that is from the get-go, that is such an act of the imagination that slaughtering a lamb could be an act of worship, could please an invisible deity, that a sign of blood on your house would symbolize to an invisible angel of death that there is such a thing as an angel of death who makes choices about which household is redeemable and which is not. So that's already in the realm of virtuality, and it keeps on. The slaves are told, the Israelites are told, gird your loins and put on sandals, and they're not told that because you got to get dressed, you got to get ready to go. It's rather, this is a symbolic costume for what you're going to be doing tomorrow. So in other words, it's a kind of putting on it, like putting on a talit, or putting on a priest's stole. You're transforming yourself in order to have a kind of spiritual readiness. But this is not going out to go quite yet. And then at that very same time, to continue the virtuality trope, the Israelites are told, you will be telling this story and observing this holiday for the rest of history. Now that is major virtuality. It has not even, this Exodus has not even happened. How could they believe so much? How could they believe they would be liberated, that they would survive, that they would endure, that they would have children, that there would be a story to tell, and further yet, that there would be meaning, the possibility of making meaning, that there would be a reason to tell this story, and that it would hold within it the DNA, the spiritual DNA for why this people should maintain itself as a sacred community worth moving from one generation to another. So that's like the early part of virtual Passover, and it continues to be virtual once. I mean, to my mind, the temple worship is also imaginative, that this is the house where God is, that God is more in this house than other people, than in other places, that a spot has greater holiness. I mean, we take it for granted that there are holy places, not holy places. But the idea of a whole group decides that their coming together is an act of intensification of holiness and of great pleasing to God. Again, that's an act of the imagination. It certainly was not imaginative that the Israelites congregated together and had this big barbecue and lamb fest, and hearing the Levites singing. I mean, that's very real. That's very visceral. That's very lived. That's not in the least bit virtual. I mean, for us it is, because we're reading about it. But if you think about this effervescent feeling of community, of certainly from the perspective of the king, it's a sense of the power of the nation, patriotism even. So that is, it's a kind of a virtuality. Then Passover goes truly, truly virtual when, after the destruction of the Second Temple, when there's no more than this virtual version of Passover can't be done anymore, this act of remembrance. It comes about, and this happens slowly. I mean, we see it in the Tosefta, we see it in the Mishnah. It does not happen overnight, that we have a Seder, that we have a ritual that gets mapped onto a Greco-Roman symposium. So it's men who are sitting around on couches. They're being given lovely food. They're being given there's wine to drink. There's intellectual discourse. There's give and take. I'm sure there's one-upsmanship. I'm sure there's music. But when the Jews adopt this form, the one thing that they don't have, for sure, I mean, it's not supposed to be a night of eroticism once the Jews get around to it, but they're not supposed to have their use of afikomen is, I believe it's called epikomen, which is going from house to house after the night of symbolic foods and study, that you go to you go Seder hopping. So like, no. But this meal is completely virtual. Here's a shank bone. This stands for a sacrifice. Here's a roasted egg, stands for another sacrifice. Here is here is maror. It stands for something else. It's a manipulation. It's an artistic, creative, theatrical manipulation of symbols that are supposed to inculcate in the practitioners a sense of memory, a sense of history, a sense of drama. This is all very, it's very, very heady. It's very heady. So if we are, and by the way, I would say that in terms of our Seder for us now, our Seder with Grandma and Grandpa and Aunt Sadie and Uncle Harold, it feels so really real to us that we forget almost that this is not the real thing, so to speak. That this is it's compensatory for a ritual that our ancestors had that was so much juicier, so much more embodied, rather than sitting around a table and saying words and having remembrances and forcing our children to ask questions that they're not even near, things that they would never ask. They wouldn't be curious about these things. I'm quite sure. So when it comes to that, now we're going to have a virtual Seder. It's only a tiny step away from what we're already doing. We can't touch the people that we love. We can't smell their foods, but we can smell our own foods. We can touch our own table. So there's a sense of we have our tactile ability. And I think even if those of us who've just been doing Zoom for 3 weeks now, Zoom already feels like, if not our mother tongue, then our second language, that we know what it means. Turn off your mute, go into your chat room. And we're already articulate in this in this vernacular. So I think it's going to seem rather, it won't seem strange. And certainly I've been to Shiva Minions on Zoom. And when at the beginning of the first Shiva Minyan, I thought, oh, this is really weird. This is really, really strange. But then when I saw myself turning on my mute, off my mute so I could speak in order to say Yehei Shmei Rabba, it's like, oh, okay. There's a ritual logic which we're learning, and I'd be very surprised if in the future, when God willing everything is all better, that we don't continue to have virtual Shivas. It just seems like it's going to be something that will be done, particularly in the conservative and the reform movements, where people are counting the quorum of 10 in a field of Zoom as constituting a minyan. So we've learned this new form. This may surprise you, or probably at this point it may not, but I think that the best Haggadah to use for the virtual Seder is this one, or this one, or this one, or the one by Noam Tzion and Mishael, or Noam Tzion and David D. Schoen, whatever Haggadah that we have. And in some ways, while we have in my family made a lovely a gender neutral Haggadah text, which we use, which essentially has the whole shebang with the addition of some poetry by Primo Levi and Natan Alterman, a little story, and just some lovely Israeli poems. I have a feeling that what we're going to be clinging to this year is something that feels not virtual, that it's enough that we have our screens in front of us. We're not going to want to go onto our laptops, if we're among liberal Jews, and obviously it's a very different story among Orthodox Jews, although as you've probably heard, there's a particular group of Sephardic Jews in Israel who've been given the heter, but the permission by their rabbi to be able to Zoom a Seder for elders by keeping your Zoom machine on through the Yadif and not doing any, not futzing around with it, which is that's a very dramatic change. And certain Orthodox people was like, no, this is completely not acceptable. But I just love it. I mean, I love this kind of instant flexibility, which in this particular case was made for the sake of elders, compassion for elders and their sense of loneliness that is particularly acute on Passover. I was going to say, I think there's a reason to have something that's familiar and tactile for this particular Pesach. Obviously, it's going to be, I think, because our Zoom attention is much shorter than in reality, and it's somewhat painful. As friendly as nice as this is, on some level, it's funny to talk to a box and not to real people. I have a feeling we'll probably be doing briefer more abridged Seders. And there is, of course, the difficulty with Zoom, if you've tried it, is you can't do group song. You cannot, do not even try it. You cannot sing together. So there will either be solos coming out of each window, or if you're in a window with your family, you can, each family can sing a verse. So you can't have that collective feeling of song. And I have a feeling that one thing that draws our Seders out is collective song. I do think that our discussions are going to be as vibrant. If you come from a family where there's vibrant discussion, I think it will be as vibrant and more so this year. I think people will make a point of, at the beginning of the night, of really checking in with each other, to making sure people are well and they have what they need. I think that's it would not be in the least bit surprising to me if people, obviously people are going to be doing that. And I have a feeling as well that people will pick up on certain kinds of questions that they might want to address, such as various questions about resilience and keeping your stiff upper lip. That when we think, for instance, of when we say L'Shana Haba'ah B'Yerushalayim, when we think of what is a redeemed world look like, that we're also probably going to be thinking about what allows us in every day to have a bit of redemption. If it is, if it's our exercise, if it's checking in with people, if it's staying away from the news a certain amount of the day, reading in particular kinds of literature that's inspiring to us. I mean, we're all, it's funny thing is, like, we're all discovering this at the same time, and all of our solutions are very close. As different as we all are, a lot of people are finding similar strategies for resilience. But I have a feeling that just naturally, you don't have to force it, but just naturally, people are going to talk about ways that they have been remoralized through this period, and how perhaps the tropes of the Haggadah give us opportunity to go, oh yes, yes. I mean, certainly when some people will start, when people will say our ancestors were our ancestors were slaves and so forth, someone is bound to say, oh, my grandparents, they went through the Depression. There is a sense of that we're going to talk about who we are, where we came from, and the fact that our ancestors had really hard times. And truth be told, I'm sure some of us are, I mean, I'm having a hard time getting a Whole Foods order, and trying a hard time getting matzah. My young Muslim friend who went to get some matzah for me, he called from the store saying, is a matzah ball the same as a matzah box? It's like, no. And I'm sort of thinking, well, maybe I do have a box of matzah meal, and maybe I can glue it together and make a matzah box out of it. Just that we're stuck at home. And I mean, for many of us, our difficulties are, in the scheme of things, small potatoes. They're inconveniences. We're lonely, we're bored, the children are making us crazy. There are so many things we wish we could have done. But weddings were canceled, funerals, you couldn't go to a funeral. And there's stuff, but I mean, the people who are struggling with illness, that's a whole, the question of how do you have a virtual Seder if you're in the hospital, that's not, it just doesn't go together. So we can talk about virtual Seders from the perspective of being blessed at this moment, for those of us who are blessed at this moment, to be able to have the composure to sit together and have a ritual. And of course, we know this. We know that in the Holocaust, that that Jews who were struggling, who were in hiding, they found incredible ways still mark Passover. One story of a family in Poland. They were being hidden by there's the Landau family. There was a boy who's 17 years old, and his father recited the Haggadah from memory to him. The people who were who were hiding them, let them grind some grain in their coffee mill, so they were able to have some matzah. And the young boy, he wrote the text out, he decorated it, and then later when he made it to Eretz Yisrael, to the land of Israel, and he was in the Haganah, I believe. When it was Passover time, he typed up on a simple typewriter. He typed up and then copied a text of the Haggadah for soldiers. So there are these incredible stories of how people manage to come through, which are different than where we are. I have, as I was saying before, and I think that the text itself, as much as, and I think the Haggadah is a mess, by the way. I think the theme of my book is the Haggadah is a disaster. If it weren't a disaster, it wouldn't have been remade 6,000 plus times. So I think the text is somewhat disastrous, doesn't quite work, and it's sort of a hodgepodge of everything anyone, anytime ever considered to try and plow through this night with some success. But I think there are certain phrases that we're going to read that are going to sound altogether different. And I'm finding this just in my morning prayers when I daven, when I say the morning prayers, it's like, oh my gosh, it's all about deliverance. And mostly when I think of deliverance, I think about Amazon packages. Did the delivery come? Did they deliver it to my door? When are they delivering it? And it's not a theme that I think about, but it's like, deliver us, oh Lord, deliver us. It's like, yeah, this is our prayer. It's a very different notion of divine capability that I'm seeing in the morning prayers. But just the prayer that we say after we light the holiday candles, after we say our first kiddush, I'm sure you know it. Blessed are you, God, who has given us life and sustained us and brought us to this happy season. To this season. I mean, that's to be able to say those words this Wednesday night, that we have life. It could have been, I think it's a Jane Kenyon poem, it could have been otherwise. We have life. Hopefully our near and dear ones have life, and that we have the sustenance that we need. We may not have a shank bone. I've never quite known what a shank bone was. And we may not have a beet. I can't get the beet delivered either. But I do have a stuffed lamb from one of the, when the girls, they left it at home. So I'm going to just put a little stuffed lamb on my Seder plate for the shank bone. That's very cute. But so we may not have everything that we need, but the season remains happy. It remains joyous. It's spring outside. And yes, when we get to the 4 questions, how is this night different? Yeah, we know damn well. We know damn well that the night is different. And I think what's a more interesting question for me is the underlying question is, and how is it still the same? How is this different night so like every single other Passover? And how does it unite us? And this is an act of virtuality as well. The fact that when we mark Passover, that we are connecting not just to the people who are in the squares here, Klal Yisrael, that we are imaginatively connecting to all of our people back and back, and there's this flood of telling this story, and so this is the last thing that I would say before I open up into discussion is I think also when we say halachma, this is the bread of affliction which our ancestors ate. All who are hungry, let them come and eat. All who are needy, let them come in and celebrate. I've always struggled with this. I've always struggled with this set of locutions. Like you're already sitting. You've already made your guest list. The cars are parked. The suitcases are in place. It's too late. It's really too late for you to act to address neediness and the hungry. And I think when we read that passage, halachma, this year, I think we need to look into ourselves and say, have I used all my imagination, all my creative ability, all my networking? Have I used my everything to discern where there is need and how I can be of help? Because if we haven't done that and we haven't nurtured, if we've got kids and and even small kids, if we haven't nurtured them so far to know that this is what's optimally important in the Passover story, that we tell this story in order to forge sensitive souls, sensitive, caring souls. But I think if we don't, if we get to that part and we can't say to ourselves, yep, did it, Panina, are you going to say something? Are you stretching? A little yoga there. And anyway, so those are just some thoughts I wanted to put out, and I'd love to get to know who you are, and to just to hear. I'm not an expert in virtual seders or virtual Haggadahs. As a matter of fact, no one is except for Martha Stewart. But I'm sure you have thought of ideas, and it would be wonderful to share and hear them. And so if just unmute yourself, and if you could say who you are and where you are, and if you have something to share, that would be great.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
Hi, my name's Israel Lowy. I live in Westchester, north of Manhattan. And my wife, Julie, is here listening in also.
Julie.
Hi.
We have loved to run Seders each year. We often have, 20, 25 people. And so this year is quite a challenge. About a month ago, we started cooking, and we have a lot of food in the freezer. And we're trying to think about how we actually make this work as a way. And I really appreciate the various things you've said, particularly the comment about not the obvious of why is this so different, but what about it is actually the same, despite it being so physically different. And that's certainly given me a lot to think about. I don't have an answer, but
yeah. I'm thinking about sometimes when something is just enough different, that it makes it extremely special. Perhaps some of you have had the experience of being in France, and it's going to be Shabbat, and you have no idea where you're going to find a challah, but you find a lovely French bread, and you find some wine, and you find some cheese, and you find yourself in a beautiful garden, and you either say with the person next to you, or you say Shalom Aleichem, and you make a little motzi, a little kiddush, and it's like, that was the best Shabbat ever. I mean, that sense of when we sometimes when we improvise our holidays, that they become stunningly special.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mira. And
Hi, Mira.
Hi. I'm currently in Berkeley. I go to school in New York, but I'm home for now. And my brother, my 18-year-old brother and I are going to be leading this Seder for our parents and ourselves this year, just the four of us at home. And I really can't remember the last time we had a Seder at home because we usually go to other people in our community, or last year I was in college. So this is really a new experience. I've never led a Seder. And it's definitely a very interesting year to launch into that, leading a Seder. I really liked what you said about thinking about the Seder. Oh, my cat is climbing in front of there. Thinking about the Seder like from its creation as something that was artistic and creative and that changed throughout time, even though there were things that stayed the same. So I'm thinking about like what part of the Seder, like what parts of the Seder have I always done and will continue to do, and are there parts that I want to adapt, and thinking about how it's like natural to adapt in this time was a really helpful framing. I'm curious to hear if other people have any like discussion questions that they are thinking of posing to the table, or like interactive activities. I was thinking of, it would be interesting to ask at least both of my parents like memorable Seders they've had during different periods of time.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea.
Yeah, so that's mostly what's been on my mind, but this has been really helpful in generating some new themes and ideas.
There might also be certain replacements if we just feel it's going to be, if we can't sing Hallel together as a group, then we might just say, let's replace Hallel with talking about each individual or family group talking about how are we grateful, or what are we grateful each and every day, or what are we grateful for that is actually surprising us, that it happens to mean so much, and it holds us together, and you might find those of you who and if you're a college student, as you are, Mira, and are you doing online classes right now?
Yes. Yeah.
So a number of profs are using the chat room, and sometimes it's easier to, if people want to write down thoughts, especially if it's a large group, it's like, if you're grateful for something, put it down, put it in the chat room. And that way you can, as long as it goes to everybody, you can see it, you can read it together. In one of my undergraduate classes on spiritual writing, I had the students create a poem together using the chat room. So we sort of, everyone put in what they were observing, what their wisdom was, and then they sort of took it and they made it into briefer poems. But it's one way of actually even crafting a prayer by picking various lines.
Hi.
Hi, Emily.
How are you?
How are you? It's so good to see you. Where are you? What are you doing?
I'm in Riverdale, and I'm finishing up my second year online at Maharat.
Great.
It's really fun. And a question I have is, really this is more based on things I've seen on Facebook, but how much room do you think the Seder should be given as a way to make comparisons to this pandemic versus leaving it as a separate space that's uninterrupted by what's going on in the world today?
Fantastic question, Emily. And you would always ask fantastic questions, and it's clearly a topic for a lot of thought, a lot of provocative thought. I'll tell you what comes to me first of all. Again, it's not an answer. It's just one stream of thought that that your words set off for me. We call COVID-19 a plague, but I think it's very, very unlike the plagues that we have in the book of Exodus. Just do a little visual right now, a little frog coming by. Okay, I think it's very different. I think in Exodus, the plagues are they're parts of a story. Whether or not there were plagues in history or not, that's irrelevant. In Exodus, they are part of a story. God means them to happen. They happen often through funny, magical kinds of tricks. They start, they stop. It's about coercing Pharaoh to act in a particular way. It's about moving Pharaoh to making a political leader make certain decisions, and it's about this. It's Pharaoh and his people are being punished. This is about the God of the Israelites choosing to punish Pharaoh and his people. I don't see, for the life of me, I don't see our current situation as being one where a God, any God has an evil mind and wants to punish the world, particularly the elderly or people with pre-existing conditions. I don't think any God wants our healthcare workers on the front lines to be enduring the stress that they're enduring right now. I think so. Yeah, Emily, I think the word plague is there, and I think they're alike in that the plagues of the Egyptians and the current plague that we're experiencing, they both demand that we make meaning, because we can't go on unless we try and find meanings. And if you just go to the New York Times today, there is one whole page where people are writing lovely stories of things that happen. Like, this is hell. This is really hellish, yet people are choosing to make meanings, and we are choosing to use what's going on and bring it into our holiday. And it's a meaning-making enterprise. So I see them connected in that kind of way. How about you? What are you thinking, Emily?
I don't know, because I feel like so much of Passover has all these opportunities to make really meaningful comparisons to things going on in the world, and I think it would be a lost opportunity if we didn't try to take Passover out of the context and see our world today through that lens. But I think it's just been getting people in a lot of theological trouble to make meaning out of something like this, because then people are at such a loss. Like, even really beautiful pieces of Torah that you could bring up could be really triggering for people right now, of like who are like alone, or like I feel like it's so raw, but everybody seems to feel quite certain about it. And it's that kind of certainty I wouldn't really want. Like, I don't really want CGC facts being brought into the Seder, but if people have uncertainty or fear or things like that, that actually might be a healing space for it.
I was listening in on, I listen to news for about 15 minutes a day, ideally not at night. And I heard Governor Cuomo saying something that I found was really extraordinary, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, "This is going to be over." And that struck me as the most powerful thing that a leader could say, a religious leader or a civic leader, that this will have an end. And I think for many of us, our anxiety is we don't know. My Rabbi B'nai Lappe said that sense of what's so difficult for her, for so many people, is we don't know where this is going, and we can't prepare for it. We can't imagine how it's going to, what the end of the story is. And I think what's what the reason that the Passover story is helpful to us is we learn not just that that our people suffered and God saved them, but we learn that there was an end of that story. In the end, there was, I mean, every story has an end and then a new story begins. It's not like once the Israelites go to the promised land, it's not like, it's not like happily ever after. There are new dramas. But I think it's very useful in terms of for psychic health to know that episodes have closure, and we move on from there. That each day at the end we go to sleep and we wake up and in the morning, Modani, we wake up in the morning. We start the story afresh.
Hi, I'm Julie. I'm here with Izzy. I have two things. One, Emily, I was thinking, we're up in Dobbs Ferry. When you said Riverdale, do you mean Riverdale down the road from us? No.
At Riverdale.
15-minute drive.
What's that?
15-minute drive.
Yeah. So anyway, there are two things I wanted to comment on. One is whether one brings this into the Seder or how to bring it in. And one of the things that, sorry, I forgot the leader's name. Vanessa spoke about was that the Haggadah was messy and that there are so many of them. And over our 25 years of hosting in our home, we've used many different Haggadah, and some years have been messier than others. And Izzy is a physician scientist, and I keep asking him questions about this disease because he's trained as an infectious disease doctor, and he keeps explaining it to me, but he keeps using the word chaos, and that it's really a chaotic, maybe you can explain that better, but that we don't know that much about it right now. And sometimes I feel that way when we're talking, when we're telling the story, that I need to learn something new, and we have a lot to learn right now about this disease and this plague, and it's very messy and very chaotic, both on a social, and cultural way, but also scientifically. They really don't know a lot about it, and it's kind of, we've never thought of the Haggadah as being messy before, but I really appreciated that, because sometimes I feel when we're going through the story, even though I've been telling it it's been told to me, or I've been telling it my whole 61 years, some years I feel like it feels a little messy. So I really appreciated that. And I want to think about how to bring that into our Seder. Especially since many of the people who will be joining us are scientists and physicians. The other thing is sort of a not as deep thinking, but I would like some thoughts about, many of my guests have expressed disappointment already at not getting the good food. And I'm very pulled, because I could cook up a storm and go running around delivering it to everybody, but I'm already exhausted cooking for my family 24/7, in which I like to cook, but right now I've got my daughter home from law school, and my husband, who never has been here, he travels so much. This is an amazing experience having him here 24/7. And I'm exhausted already from cooking so much, and I've got a lot of food in the freezer, but I don't know that it's right for me to go driving around to deliver it. No, I'm getting a good, Rebecca, people have said things to me already, and I'm not sure how to handle it, because the food is a big part, the change in diet and food and what we're eating.
Julie, are these people who are upset about the food, are they indigent?
No.
I would say take the food, take your extra food and bring it to and bring it to the soup kitchen.
I love that. That's a great idea.
Just take what you've already made, the extra food, bring it to the soup kitchen.
And send out recipes to my friends. I'll send the recipes.
Something, you don't need to do that. They can go online. You want to know how to make a matzo ball? You do go Google matzo ball.
Okay.
There's no.
You know what? That's a great idea because I made
no great magic.
I made 13 pounds of brisket a month ago, and I'm not going to eat 13 pounds of brisket. So you're right. I could bring it to a local. So that's a great idea.
It would be pretty amazing. I think part of, when people say, oh, I'm going to miss the food. In some ways, it's we flatter our hosts when we say we're going to miss your.
It made me feel bad.
Yeah.
It made me feel bad.
I think also, Jamie, imagine if this was Christmas coming up. Imagine all the, it's one thing that that there's been a lot of rabbis doing, how do you have virtual Seder? Can you imagine what our culture would be doing? How do you have a virtual Christmas? It's a feeling,
Right.
It's a feeling. We're bummed out. My college students who are in their fourth year, who won't have graduation, they're bummed out. You get over it.
They'll get over it. But I think that's a great idea. I should have thought of that, but it's lovely. I think we can do that. We have so much. It's a great idea.
Great. That sounds pretty wonderful.
It is even, I think this might have been at Misha's session earlier this week or at a different session where they talked about how to create like a sense of sharedness, like eating the same food. And this isn't to say drive around town and deliver it to everyone, but even saying like, everyone make your own matzo ball soup and we will be eating matzo ball soup at this time. Like as a potential option, or like one shared kind of sense of eating together, even if it's different recipes, even if it's from different places, could help create or fill a little bit of that gap of longing of this kind of sharedness.
I got to tell you, there was a wonderful piece that was put out by Rabbanit Dasi Fruchter and some of her pals on Passover this year. Like how to have an uber small Seder, like what happens if you're just all by yourself. And one of the suggestions was do it in your pajamas and have as your main meal matzah and cream cheese. And I thought, this is brilliant. This is to be liberated from all the obligations. It's just like get through some of the Seder and have matzah and cream cheese. I just think that would be lovely. Hi, Dan.
Hi, Vanessa. I'm Talia's dad.
Oh, nice.
So thank you for what you shared, and I agree. I think Israel mentioned this at the beginning about the virtual nature. You're kind of highlighting that the Seder from the outset was virtual reality, that you actually had to imagine something, and I think you set the stage really nicely for thinking about it in that way, and that's very helpful. And I also wanted to address what Emily brought up about how to connect it to the current crisis. And I think that it's not a plague and it's not God making a decision to inflict this on anybody. But I think that there is a character that is significant in the Exodus story, if not necessarily in the Haggadah, but except for Dayenu. But it's really the role of Pharaoh. And that Pharaoh is, in a sense, presented with certain facts, things that he sees before himself. And based on that, he's challenged to make a decision that he doesn't want to make. It's an ethical decision. It's a moral decision. The challenge to him is a challenge about how people should be treated and who should be respected and whose lives should be valued. And 10 times he goes back on his word. 10 times he's presented with facts and is challenged to address that. And I just think that there's a really interesting discussion to be had about Pharaoh, the presentation of evidence and ethical demands, and how do you respond to that? So that was one comment that I just wanted to share.
Dan, that is so powerful.
Thank you.
So powerful, and one could easily say manish tana, have a matzah, do some dipping, and then say, now let's talk about that.
Yeah.
And then get out the matzah and the cream cheese.
Right. Yes, I think, you could do Wuhan, Italy, Washington. There's a whole range of things that you could do.
Yeah. So I see we're coming to the end. I'm just really, I feel very lucky to have had the opportunity to talk, to learn with you tonight. I wish you all a really joyous, real Pesach. And if you're curious to learn more about the Haggadah, you can check out my book, the Passover Haggadah, which is on Amazon. But if you buy it directly from Princeton and write Ochs 30, they give you 30% off, which is pretty good. So I'm just happy. Thank you, Becky, for the invitation. Thank you, Penina, for being our technical person. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. This was wonderful, and it was great to learn with all of you tonight.
Pleasure.
Beautiful.
Pleasure.
Really
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.